When is Star Trek? Section 31 set in the franchise's timeline? Star Trek has never been shy about expanding its universe across centuries, parallel realities, and even alternate timelines. With Star Trek, Section 31 finally on the way, one of the biggest questions for longtime fans is where exactly it fits into the franchise's ever-growing chronology. Section 31, the Federation's morally murky intelligence agency, has lurked in the shadows of multiple Star Trek series, from Deep Space Nine to Enterprise. But its own dedicated film promises to shed more light than ever before on an organization that thrives on secrecy. Placing Section 31 in the timeline is no simple matter, because the group's history stretches from the earliest days of the Federation to the farthest corners of the galaxy. To answer the question, we need to look at how Section 31 was portrayed across Star Trek shows, where the upcoming project is anchored, and how it bridges different eras of the canon. Section 31's origins in the Star Trek timeline. Section 31 derives its name from Article 14, Section 31 of the Starfleet Charter, which allows for extraordinary measures in times of extreme threat. This clause became the justification for the agency's very existence. First introduced in Star Trek, Deep Space Nine 1998, Section 31 was depicted as an autonomous, covert operation untethered from Federation oversight. However, later shows and prequels revealed that Section 31's roots extend far deeper. In Star Trek, Enterprise set in the 22nd century, the agency was already active before the Federation itself was officially founded. Agents like Luther Sloan in DS9 and Malcolm Reed's reluctant involvement in Enterprise painted a picture of an organization that had been around for centuries, shaping galactic events behind the curtain. So, while fans first encountered Section 31 during the Dominion War era, the group's presence long predates Captain Sisko's encounters with them. This is why nailing down the timeline of the upcoming Section 31 film depends on identifying which era of the organization's shadowy existence it will spotlight. Section 31 in Star Trek. Discovery. The clearest signpost for Section 31's placement in the franchise is Emperor Philippa Georgiou, played by Michelle Yeoh. The film will follow her exploits after the events of Star Trek: Discovery. In Discovery's first two seasons set in the mid-23rd century, about 10 years before the events of the original series, Section 31 was shown as far less clandestine than in later portrayals. The organization operated with advanced ships, black badges, and even publicly recognized operatives like Ash Tyler. This incarnation of Section 31 felt more like a sanctioned intelligence service than the deniable, hidden organization that Sisko and Bashir tangled with in DS9. But everything changed in Season 2, when Control, the AI system used by Section 31, nearly annihilated all sentient life in the galaxy. The near apocalypse forced Starfleet to reconsider Section 31's autonomy. By the time of Pike and Kirk, Section 31 had already retreated deeper into the shadows, aligning more with how it was portrayed later in the timeline. Georgiou, pulled from the mirror universe into the prime timeline, became a major player in Section 31's mid-23rd century activities. However, due to the temporal war and her displacement in time, her story soon outgrew the era she had landed in. The temporal displacement of Philippa Georgiou. One of the key moments for understanding the new film's timeline comes in Discovery Season 3. When the crew jumped nearly 1,000 years into the future to the 32nd century, Georgiou began experiencing a molecular breakdown. The cause? Her being both from the mirror universe and displaced in time. The Guardian of Forever revealed that she could not survive in the 32nd century and needed to return to a more compatible era. In a moving farewell episode, Georgiou stepped through the Guardian's portal into an undisclosed point in the past. Fans have long speculated where she landed, and Paramount Plus' confirmation of the Section 31 film gave the answer. Georgiou returned to the 23rd century, shortly after the events of Discovery Season 2. This sets the Section 31 movie squarely in the mid-23rd century, the same general era as Strange New Worlds and just years before Captain Kirk takes command of the Enterprise. It's a period of Star Trek history ripe for exploration, balancing the optimism of the Federation with the growing need for shadowy organizations to protect it. Mid-23rd century. Why this era makes sense. Placing Section 31 in the mid-23rd century is not only logical given Georgiou's arc, but it also fills a crucial gap in the Star Trek timeline. The Federation at this point was still expanding, still vulnerable, and still struggling to establish stability after wars with the Klingons and Romulans. In Discovery, we saw how Section 31 justified its existence by arguing that the Federation's survival required sacrifices that Starfleet captains like Pike or Kirk would never condone. This moral grayness provides fertile storytelling ground. It also explains why by the time of the original series, Section 31's presence isn't widely known. Georgiou's exploits could represent the last gasp of a more public-facing Section 31, before it withdraws completely into secrecy. By the Dominion War era DS9, Section 31 has become a whisper, and that evolution is part of what the film can dramatize. How Section 31 connects to the wider timeline. To truly understand where the film sits in the timeline, it helps to track Section 31's appearances across the canon. 1. 22nd Century Enterprise. Section 31 manipulates Starfleet officers during humanity's first steps into interstellar politics. Malcolm Reed's covert ties show how early the agency embedded itself. 2. Mid-23rd Century Discovery/Section 31. Georgiou's story unfolds here. This is the transition period between a semi-public intelligence bureau and the shadowy agency it becomes later. 3. Late 23rd Century TOS era. Section 31 retreats underground. While not directly seen in the original series, its actions are implied to influence Starfleet policy in unseen ways. 4. 24th Century DS9, Into Darkness. Section 31 resurfaces during the Dominion War, taking extreme measures like infecting the Founders with a virus. Later, J.J. Abrams' Kelvin timeline film Into Darkness depicts a more militarized version of Section 31, but that's a parallel continuity. 5. 32nd Century Discovery. Mentioned but largely inactive, with the agency's legacy more myth than active influence. By situating the film in the mid-23rd century, Section 31 bridges the gap between its early foundations and its later, more sinister reputation. The significance of Section 31's timeline placement. The timing of Section 31 matters because it shapes how the Federation itself is viewed. The mid-23rd century is often idealized thanks to the original series and Strange New Worlds, which showcase exploration, diplomacy, and optimism. By exploring the same era through Section 31, the franchise adds nuance. The Federation's shining image may have always depended on shadows working behind the scenes. It also allows for exciting crossover potential. Since the movie is set near the same period as Strange New Worlds, characters like Captain Pike, Spock, or even a young Kirk could intersect with Georgiou's journey. Thematically, it's a chance to explore what Starfleet heroes refuse to do and what Section 31 insists must be done. Conclusion: Section 31 in context. So, when is Star Trek Section 31 set in the franchise's timeline? The answer: the mid-23rd century, shortly after the events of Discovery Season 2, and just before the era of Captain Kirk's 5-year mission. This placement makes perfect sense both narrative